close till I get up. Time is barely on our side. I don't wanna waste what's left. The storms we chase are leading us, and love is all we'll ever trust. Yeah, no, I don't wanna waste what's left. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll go.
Hello friends, welcome back to the channel, or if you are new here, welcome. Nothing says fall like cooler weather and a nice cozy bowl of soup. So today I'm sharing with you my go-to easy fall soup recipes. And I'm starting off with one I don't think people often think about, lasagna soup. This one is delicious, quick, and perfect for a pasta-loving family. I'm starting off by browning half a pound of Italian sausage and half a pound of ground beef in a large skillet. You can mix this variation up a little bit. There have been times where I've used all Italian sausage and no ground beef. However, I don't think just all ground beef would really have the same Italian feel to it. So I do suggest using the Italian sausage, or if you're using just the ground beef, maybe adding like Italian seasoning and stuff like that to kind of give it that effect. I know I have some family members that don't often use Italian sausage because I think it causes like indigestion problems or something, but you can mix this up for your own taste. I would just, if you're using ground beef and no Italian sausage, adding in a couple of Italian elements like garlic and Italian seasoning. This next step is somewhat optional. I like to take the large pot that I plan on cooking the entire thing of soup in. I like to boil the noodles ahead of time in that pot and then drain them and mix everything together in that pot. However, I learned to make this recipe by making the entire soup first and then having the noodles cook and boil in the soup after it's completely done. That it works out fine that way. However, I am usually in a time crunch, so I like to boil the noodles at the same time that I am cooking the meat and all the veggies and stuff, and I feel like it just saves a little bit of time instead of waiting to cook the noodles when it's all done. So you can do it either way. It works both ways. But if you're in a little bit of a time crunch like I am, cooking the noodles ahead of time or at the time that you're making the rest of the soup, I feel like it goes a little quicker. I diced up one medium-sized onion, and I'm going to add that to the ground beef mixture while it's cooking. I'm going to give this mixture a really good stir to make sure it is all cooking very evenly, and then I'm going to add in some seasonings. Now, I am pretty approximate with my seasonings, but if you're interested in this recipe, you can find it down below in the description box. I used some garlic. You can use minced garlic or fresh garlic if you're wanting to mince that up. I don't usually have that on hand, so I'm just using powdered garlic. And then I'm measuring in with my heart some oregano, basil, and parsley. Don't forget the salt and pepper, and then to give it a really good stir afterwards to fully coat everything evenly.
Crowded places, feel it sinking in. Lonely faces, say you need a friend. No matter the distance.
To that mixture, I'm going to be adding a ton of spinach. So I use about half a bag. And so Usually I'll put in a whole bunch and then I'll go back in once it is cooked down a little bit and add in the rest of the half a bag. So I'm using this one bag for 2 recipes in today's video. So I'm using half of it in this one and I'll use half in the other. But again, spinach is something that is so nice because it looks like initially you're using so much, but it cooks down so nicely that you can really get away with putting quite a bit in these and kind of hiding it from picky kids or anybody who does not necessarily love spinach. You can really hide it well in these recipes. As you can see, that cooked down a ton, so I'm going to be adding the remainder of that half of the bag into here, and I'll stir it a couple of times and get it really cooked down as well. You can't even really tell that I used that much spinach. That's one thing that's like incredible to me, is how much spinach wilts down. You can also add in other vegetables if you're wanting, like mushrooms or peppers. Those things are really great additions. I did not have any of that on hand, so I'm just adding in what I have. The water is now boiling in my pot, so I'm going to be adding in all the pasta that I plan on using in the soup. Now, I used bow tie noodles. However, the recipe does say to break up lasagna noodles. I felt like it really made no difference. I had bow tie, so that is what I used. And again, if you're wanting to not cook the pasta ahead of time and just cook it in the soup, you totally could do that. You will just make the entire soup in the big pot and then put the pasta noodles in afterward, and then they will just cook inside the soup. So now the pasta is cooked all the way through. I have drained it and I'm going to be adding in all the ingredients. So I put the ground beef mixture into the pot. I'm going to be adding in some Italian style diced tomatoes, undrained. You're going to do a 24-ounce jar of marinara sauce. It says 2 cups of beef broth. However, I did more than that, and I usually do, so you can add, I think I did like 3 or 4 cups instead. I just like mine a little bit more brothier and not as thick, so that is why I did that. I also used, because my marinara sauce, I couldn't find one in the 24-ounce jar, so it was a little less. I did use some canned tomato sauce that I have canned, so that is why you saw there was like kind of a mixture. You can also add in more Italian seasoning if you have that. And then it calls for adding ricotta cheese or Italian blend cheese or both. I usually will not add the ricotta. For one, my family is not a huge ricotta fan. However, the cheese, I also will wait until the very end, and I kind of let people just garnish the cheese themselves. So I have the pot completely filled with all of the soup. Everything is incorporated, and I'm going to let it just simmer for a little longer to kind of thicken up and get all of those flavors nice and mingled together. Since I did not add any of the cheese into the soup, now people can kind of just garnish it with however they're wanting. I usually like just a small sprinkle of Parmesan cheese, but I do usually have out there like an Italian style cheese as well. Here's how the soup turned out. I usually will serve it with like some homemade bread or a salad on the side, like Olive Garden style with the Italian dressing. This night I just did some garlic bread straight from the freezer, but it was perfect. Next up is the copycat version of the Olive Garden chicken gnocchi soup. I have made this on repeat for years and years and years now, and I have made it on my channel a couple of times, but this one is so good, it is well worth listing again. Now, this recipe is a crock pot meal and can kind of be done a couple different ways. However, the first few steps are done in a pan. So if you don't have time or you're just wanting to cook everything on the stove, you absolutely can do that. However, I will usually just do the first couple of ingredients on the stove, and then I'll put it in the crock pot to cook like the remainder of the way throughout the whole day. So again, this recipe can be done a couple of different ways for kind of starting things off. You do not need to dice up your chicken breast like I am doing here and cooking it in little pieces on the stove. You can actually just throw it in completely raw into your crock pot and it will work out just fine. And I usually will actually do it that way. And I think I did not this time was because I was kind of not wanting the shredded chicken texture. I was wanting them more like chicken bite texture. So that's really the only reason why I cooked mine ahead of time. So I diced 2 chicken breasts up in small little bite-sized pieces, and then I sauteed them until they weren't even cooked all the way through. I just wanted to brown them on the outside, and then I tossed them into the crock pot. Now in that same pan, I am going to chop up some bacon, and I just use kitchen shears to cut my bacon pieces. I'll put them in and I cook them almost all the way. I kind of like mine a little crunchier. So I'll cook them and then I will put them in the crock pot again with the chicken. While the bacon is cooking on the stove, I'm going to get my veggies all sliced up and ready to go into that same pot on the stove. So I'm going to be dicing up celery. Now, I love celery in soup, so I use a lot more usually than what the recipe calls for. So I diced up some celery stalks. I did 1 medium-sized onion. I'm dicing that up into small chunks as well. And then I'm also going to be doing carrots, and I'll put that all into the same pan that I've cooked the chicken in and the bacon in. I'll cook them all together and not cook them all the way, but just kind of get them browning and starting to cook before I put them in the crock pot. The bacon is done, so I'm scooping it up and leaving the grease in the pan to use for the vegetables. So I'm just scooping that up into the crock pot, and then, like I said, leaving the grease in the pan, and I'm going to cook the vegetables in that grease. Every time I think about making this recipe, part of me is like, oh, it's daunting because I have to cook this stuff ahead of time. Now, you don't cook all of it, but you do cook like the vegetables and the bacon. Again, you don't have to do the chicken, but I always feel like, oh, it's daunting, and I kind of put it off. However, whenever I start it and I'm actually, going through the entire process, it is not nearly as bad as like I talk myself into beforehand. So just know that, yes, this is not, the typical dump and go recipe for the crock pots, but it is really worth doing this stuff ahead of time. And if you already have like carrots and stuff sliced up ahead of time, it makes it even easier. So yes, it has a little bit of a setup, but it is not nearly as time consuming as you think, and as I always tell myself at the very beginning, but it is so worth it. This soup is definitely a top favorite of ours. I also will make this for like family get-togethers. My husband, he is really into football, and so a lot of times throughout the fall we will do like football get-togethers, and where we will have kind of like a potluck type of thing where we make like football food is what I call it. But a lot of times to feed all those people, we will have a couple people will bring different crock pot meals, specifically soup, and this is always a hit. So I love making this particular soup because everybody tends to like it. And then we'll also have, a variety. We'll have usually people bring chili, stuff like this. But if you have a potluck or you do football food for a football get-together like we do, this is an incredible dish to make. Okay, so we have all of these veggies in the pot, and our goal is to not completely cook them through, just to cook them a little bit and kind of brown them some. Into this, I'm going to add garlic. You can do garlic, you can do fresh minced garlic, you can do garlic powder, whatever you have on hand will work. I have a little bit of garlic left, about a teaspoon, so that is what I added into this mixture. And if you remember from earlier in the video, we used half a bag of spinach. I'm going to be adding in the other half of the spinach to this mixture. I just want to cook this down a little bit more because the spinach cooks down very quickly. So I add it in when the vegetables are almost done cooking. Now that all these veggies have cooked down, I'm going to add everything into the crock pot. I'll give it a good stir, and then I'm going to add in the remainder of the ingredients, but everything else from here on out will just cook in the crock pot. To the crock pot, you're going to add in chicken broth. Now, it calls for 28 ounces of chicken broth. I cannot do that because I always have to add more. So I want it more soupy, and I kind of stretch it for leftovers. So I actually added in 6 cups instead of I think it's like 3.5 is 28 ounces. So I did that, and then I'm adding in some seasoning. I believe it's Italian seasoning if I saw it. I'll give it a good stir. And then I'll put this insert into the crock pot to get it started. To thicken the soup, I am going to be doing 1/4 cup. I actually end up doing a little more because I did add more chicken broth. So, however, the recipe calls for 1/4 cup of flour, and then you can mix it with a variety of things. I was using evaporated milk and ended up pouring some on me. So it worked out well. It worked out exactly how it should, other than it spilling on me, but I use evaporated milk in this recipe, and so I just figured I would go ahead and use that into this mixture to thicken the soup up. Now, if you decide later on that the soup is still a little too thin, like I did because I added too much of the chicken broth, you can do more of this mixture and just slowly add it in until it's the consistency that you want. I mentioned how I do the evaporated milk in this recipe instead of the half and half or milk or heavy cream. If I have heavy cream, I usually will use it. However, that's not usually a thing I have on hand. So I like doing evaporated milk, and I use 2 cans of the evaporated milk. I feel like it just makes the soup very creamy. It doesn't add that curdled consistency that you sometimes get with like milk and stuff. So if you're wanting to make a soup creamier, the evaporated milk works wonderful to do that. Now, most of the ingredients are in the crock pot now, so I gave it a good stir to mix it all together. I'll put the lid on, and I'm going to cook it on low and slow all day for about 6 hours. You can speed that up if you're wanting to do on high for 4 hours. Again, just check it every so often to make sure that it's the consistency that you're wanting. Then 1 hour before the soup is done and you're ready to eat it, you're going to go in and put in the potato gnocchis. Now, you can get a variety of those. My children over the years, they used to like the potato gnocchis. However, 1, they're a little harder to find down here, and 2, my kids stopped liking them. So because of that, I will often do like a homemade egg noodle. So that is what I put in there. I did small pieces of egg noodle, and I cook that the last hour that the soup is cooking. And then here it is all done. I did make an Italian style Olive Garden salad to go on the side of it with whatever ingredients I had, but I tried to keep it as close as I could to the restaurant, and it definitely has those vibes. We are like 2 hours from our nearest Olive Garden, and it definitely hit the spot. Our next soup that we're going to be starting is clam chowder. I grew up eating this New England style clam chowder from a can. I don't even remember the brand. I want to say it was Campbell's, but I'm not completely positive. But my mom bought that brand my entire life, and so whenever I think of clam chowder, this is it resembles what I grew up eating. This recipe is kind of a mixture of a bunch of different recipes just that I have made through trial and error, and I have found one that really works best for our family. I make this a couple of times a year, and oddly enough, my youngest asked for this, and so I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll make it. It is shockingly easy to make, and I feel like that, for one, people don't really realize. This one is another crockpot recipe. However, just like the last recipe, I'm going to be starting it in a pan and then adding the stuff into the crockpot. So I diced up a medium-sized onion pretty finely, and then I'm putting it into some butter in a pan and getting that sauteing to kind of just not to cook through, but again, just like the last recipe, cook a little bit before we add it to the crock pot. I'm going to be adding in the remainder of the celery that I have, putting that into the pan as well. I'm sauteing these until they have a little bit of brown on them. So now that they have a little bit of color, I'm going to put them into the crock pot and add in the rest of the ingredients. You can dice your own potatoes for this recipe. I like to take the easy way out and do true dump and go style. So I will buy the canned potatoes and I'll drain them, and then I'll add them in. But you can dice your own potatoes. You just have to cook it a little longer. And I kind of have a rule with this where I do the 3 cans of the diced potatoes, and then it's 3 cans of the clams. So it's, I don't know, for some reason I just always remember it's always 3 cans because it's like 3 cans of each. So the clams that I buy, this is the can that I buy, and you will put in the juice and the clams, and I try to scrape all of the stuff inside to get everything inside. And then, like I said, the 3 cans of the drained diced potatoes, or your own if that's what you're wanting to do. This is the clam juice I always buy. You give it a very good shake before you dump in all of it. And then again, I'm going to use the evaporated milk. I like to do 2 cans of evaporated milk into this mixture. To season this, you can add in garlic, and I believe I do. At least I usually do. I don't remember seeing me do it. And then you'll do a good amount of pepper and salt and a tiny bit of thyme. If you like thyme a lot more than I do, then you can add a little bit more, but I usually just do a hint of it, just so it has a hint of it throughout the soup. So giving that a good mixture, I'll put the lid on, and again, either cook it on low for 6 hours or for high for 4 hours. If you're wanting to thicken your soup up, you can put in the flour mixture like we did in the last soup. That is kind of just dependent, and sometimes I do it and sometimes I don't. It just really depends on how much liquid I add into it, and it just seems to vary. So adjust it how you're wanting the consistency, but that is how you do it. You'll just add in the flour mixture to kind of thicken it up. You can also use cornstarch. Here's how it turned out. I garnished it with some green onions and served it with some grilled cheese. It was very simple, but it was delicious and perfect for fall. This next recipe is going to go by super quick, but that is just how easy it is. It is definitely a dump and go recipe. Now this is something I call chicken dip. It's a recipe that I have adapted from a chicken dip. So I have made it into a soup. So if you're wanting it more of a dip, then you can just add in less liquid. I started by adding in diced up chicken breasts. Now you can put in raw, you can also use rotisserie, but I already had some on hand. I did 2 chicken breasts that I diced up and I put in the bottom. I used what I think is like half a brick of Velveeta. I try not to use a lot of Velveeta, so I will have down below in the description box the exact amount that I used of that, but I use a little less Velveeta than I know that the original dip recipe called for. Then I will put in 2 cans of cream of chicken, 1 can of Rotel. You can also put in more cream of chicken if you're wanting. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I'm giving it a good mix, and then I'm going to add in the chicken broth. Now, the original dip recipe has a very little amount of chicken broth, but because I'm making this dip into a soup, I'm going to add in about 4 cups. So you can do about 3 or 4 depending on the consistency that you're wanting. We like it a little bit soupier, so I did add 4 cups of already prepared chicken broth that I already had. I'm going to give it a good mix, and I'll put the lid on. Now, whenever I serve this, because it was like a dip, I will crush up tortilla chips, and that is what I serve on top of it. This recipe is super easy, super quick. There's not a ton of ingredients that go with it, but it makes a perfect fall soup. It also makes a really great dip. So if you're having that football Sunday or just having a fall soup day, it is a wonderful thing to have. But anyway, that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.